All right. Okay. So today we're actually going to be looking at conditionals, if else if statements, but the very first thing we're going to look at is variables. So beforehand, when we talked about variables, we saw that we could have a variable here called letter, and I could assign to it some string value A. Now, in this case, this specific activity here, we're going to be doing kind of a small little virtual pet simulator. So we want to create constant variables that will hold the emoji for pet, food, bed, and toys. So in this case, does anyone remember how we go about actually creating a constant variable versus just a normal variable? What's the difference?
Constant will not change its value throughout the whole code.
Perfect. So the constant is not going to change its value throughout the whole code, but we also want to make sure that it's always going to be uppercase here. So in this case, if I wanted to create a pet variable, I'm going to make sure that it's all uppercase. And in this case, in the same way that I can assign a string here, this letter character A to the variable letter, I'm going to do the same for emojis. So for those of you on Windows, you're going to click on the window key and the period symbol. And then you should see this little emoji thing pop up, and you should be able to place your dog in there. For Mac users, I believe it's FN and the global key, and then E, or you can go to edit emoji and symbols, and then you should get your characters there. And if you notice here, because emojis are considered strings, if I don't have my quote in front and back, we do have a little error message there. So you want to make sure that you have your quote to indicate that it is a string in the front and in the back. We're going to do the same for food, bed, and toy. Food equals. So is anyone having trouble with this, or are we okay? So now that we have, and I'm going to just comment out letter here because that was just a demonstration. Now that we have our constant variables, four of them, the pet, the food, the bed, and the toy, and you could pick any of the emojis you want, just as long as it represents the variable that we have. The next thing we need to do is actually create a list called bag. So we want an inventory of all the items associated with this virtual pet that we have. And so we're going to use the data structure list. So here we're going to create a list by having the list name bag. And does anyone remember what we use for the list data structure? What is the structure of it? How do I indicate that I'm going to make it a list? Perfect. So we're going to have the open close square brackets here. That's what indicates the list. So the next thing we're going to pass in here is we're going to pass in pet, food, toy, and then bed. All right. So now that we have our list here, we know that in order to access pet, we can either use 0 or -4, 1 or -3 for food, 2 or -2 for toy, and 3 or -1 for bed. The next thing that we are actually going to do is we want to print it out on a line, the all of the information that we've stored in bag, but we want to do it using the join function, if you guys remember how to use that from last week. So we're going to do print, and then we're going to just say bag inventory. And then we're going to do comma. And then we're going to have a space because we want a space in between our emojis here. And then we're going to do dot join. Now, will this line of code work when I run it, or is there something missing? So I have my string that's going to print out here. I've done this well where I have the comma and then I have the space to join each emoji together. But what is missing is actually in the parentheses. I need to indicate what I'm actually joining. And so in this case, I'll just pass in a bag as a parameter into this built-in function join. And that is what will join those items together. So when I run it, it should look like this, where we have a space in between the dog and the meat and the toy and the bed here. And this space in front of here is actually from the comma that we have here. It gives that space right after your string statement. Does everyone have this working so far? Does anyone have any issues with this? Please say something before I move on to the next. All right. So the next thing that we're going to focus in on is actually string and formatting. So for this first one, we're just going to have a scenario of having information from the user, and you don't know exactly how the user is going to format or write this information, but just in case, you need to be able to store clean data and actually be able to manipulate and modify it in a way that you would prefer it to be. So in this case, that is what this task is doing. So we have our variable called name underscore raw. And then what we're going to do is we want to actually assign some sort of value to this. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have two spaces in the front. And then I'm going to put all lowercase the, a lowercase s, an uppercase U and an N, space, an uppercase R, a lowercase I, an uppercase S, and a lowercase E and S. And then I'm going to also have an extra two spaces at the end here. That way you have two spaces, the sun rises with the U and N being uppercase, the R being uppercase, and the S being uppercase. So the next thing I want to do is a remembrance of the different built-in functions that you can use. You can use the dot strip, and that dot strip gets rid of the space in the front and in the back here. Does anyone remember what the dot title does? So if I'm given this, what would the dot title do? Yeah. So instead, what it does is it actually takes this, it capitalizes the first letter in each word, and it makes everything else normalized. That way it looks just like a good title. It's a good formatting skill to do. So in this case here, what it asks us to do is it asks us to take the name raw, and we're going to strip it and then use title. And we want to store it instead of updating this value into a new value called name underscore clean. So here we'll have name underscore clean. And then what we'll do is we'll have name underscore raw. And then we'll do dot strip to strip out the spaces, and then dot title. And then that will then display out our title. So what I'll do here, I'll just print out both the name underscore raw just to test to make sure everything turned out well, and then print name underscore clean. So what you should get here is the extra space for the original raw name here, and then the extra space at the end for that original. And then you should see for this, the sun rises, everything should be in this format. Did everyone get this working for them so far? All right. So now that we've done these two, the very next thing that we want to do is number 3. So what we're going to do is we first want to check whether there is a space inside of the clean character. And we're also going to want to clean the name by finding the first space. And then we're going to save the index of the first space as space index. And we're going to use the find function. If you guys remember from last week when we used count and find, when we were looking at string manipulations, we're going to use find again. And then we're also going to save the first letter as the first letter. But this is where we're going to also introduce some conditional statements. So if the name itself is empty, we're just going to use an empty blank space. Now, how I go about doing this is I start with what you know to do first, right? So the very first thing you know how to do is you know how to create a variable called space index. Then the next thing you have to do is actually be able to have the clean name. So we're going to do name underscore clean. And we're going to use the find function. And what it's asking us to do is find the first space. So we're just going to put inside of find the string space. So already you've done one thing. The next thing that it's actually asking us to do is a mixture of stuff. So we want to save the first letter if the name is empty. We also want to find the first space and save the first space. And so what we're going to do here is we'll have an if statement. Now you notice when I type in this if statement here, it's blue. This means that it's a keyword. This means you can't use this in any of your function or any of your variable naming. So we're saying if name underscore clean, and that's just whatever is stored in here. If that condition is met, then the next thing we'll place inside of here is just assign the first letter of that. And we're going to use 0. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to check to see if there is a space character in the cleaned name by finding the first space. In this case, if there is something inside of this variable name underscore clean, then we're going to assign the first letter in this case, or the first character in this case, to first letter. That's essentially what's happening in this section here. Then the next thing that we're going to do is we'll have an else statement. And so this else part is if the name is empty. So if this condition is not met, if there's nothing in name clean, it's going to go directly to else here. So in this case, we're going to put else as first underscore letter, and we're going to assign an empty string to it. All right, so when I run this, the first thing, let me go ahead and print out first letter. So when we see here, it does print out T as the first letter, and that's because this condition was met. That's because inside of name clean, we have the sun rises. Now, if I change this since this first condition was met, if I change now the name underscore clean here, and I change it and I assign it an empty string, the else statement is going to be what gets printed out instead of T. We're going to get an empty blank because there is nothing inside of this new updated name clean. So this condition is going to return false, and then it's going to go straight to else here. So in this case, when I run it, we no longer see T, but we do have an empty space at the bottom here. So you'll want to comment this out. This is just for demonstration purposes. And what you should get of the first letter of this should be T. Is everyone good up to this point? The next portion of this is going to have us actually create a nickname out of the cleaned name that we have here. Before I move on again, does anyone have any questions? Are we okay? All right. So the next thing here we're going to do is we want to create a nickname from the cleaned name that goes up to the third letter, but does not include the third letter. The only characters before index 2 is what we want to include. So we're going to save our whatever item or value we have into the variable nick, and we're going to slice from the start to the position before index 2. Now, based off of that and what we went through last week, does anyone know, or can anyone guide me on how I would go about doing this? I'm a variable nick, and I want to output items up to before index 2. What should I do if it's in a list? We have name underscore clean. Perfect, perfect. So here we're going to put the colon and then we're going to put 2 so that it goes from everything at the beginning up to index 2 and that gets stored into the variable name. The very next thing that we're going to do here is we want to use f string to print out this information. So we're going to do print, and then we're going to have our open close parentheses. Oops. The f in front of our string. And then if I want to place in here hello and comma, what should be the next thing that I place in here in place of the name clean and the open close diamond operator? If I want to place in there the value for name clean. Anyone can take a stab at it. Try your hand at it. All right, so inside of this string portion here, you'll have the open close curly braces. And inside of here, we're going to place in here name underscore clean. This is the placeholder for this variable's value here. So now we have hello, comma, name underscore clean in open close quotes. We're also going to want to make sure, because we want to keep it in the same format, that we have an open close parentheses. And inside of this open parentheses here, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to put nick, colon, and then we're going to put in our open close curly braces first letter. Oh, and then, oh wait, wrong thing. We're going to put nick in open close curly braces. My apologies. And then the next thing we're going to do after nick is going to have a comma and then put first, and then have our open close curly braces first underscore letter here. When I run this, what you should get after running this full cell is the sun rises, the original string, the updated manipulated string, the first character of that string, and then here we want to print out hello, the sun rises, the title here, and then we have Nick with the nickname of the, and then we have first being the first character within that string, which is T. Did anyone not get this working for them? Okay. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about these concepts here? All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is list, indexing, slicing, and join. So you guys have seen these concepts quite a bit since last week, but we're going to go ahead and review parts of it. So the very first thing here is we're going to be using the existing list that we had above called bag. And we want to set the first item to the first element. So that means we need to have a variable called first item. And we're going to store inside of that item the first item of bag. So does anyone remember? I had someone initially say it when we created the list bag. How would I get the first item inside of this list? Perfect. So we have bag and then square brackets and 0. This allows for the first item within that list, which at this case would be pet, to be stored into the variable first item. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set the last two to a slice with the last two elements. So first things first, I'm going to create the variable, start with what you do know how to do. And then based off of the very first one, because I'm going to be splicing bag, I'm going to go ahead and type in bag and put open close square brackets. If you don't know necessarily how to get the last two, we can go back up to here when I looked at the different indexes of this list. So in order to get the last two items here, I would have to place in -2, well, colon and then -2 versus where we did it here just to get the first two colon +2. So on this end here, we would have colon, and then in front of that, because we're looking at the negative index, we're going to do -2 here. So we're going to go ahead and print that out real quick to see the first item. 2. So here we see we got the first item stored, great, and then we also got the last two items of our list displayed as well. So we know that it works. Now what I'm doing here is called testing or debugging. If you run into any issues or you find that you didn't get certain results, you do printing at each step that you do just to check to make sure what the value is. This is a process of coding that while you're writing your program, you just print out each item as opposed to just writing and assuming you did it correctly. Now, the next part here, after we've gotten the first item of that list and the last two items of that list using negative slicing, the next thing we want to do is actually be able to print out the bag join. We want to be able to also print out the first item and the last item, but not in the way that we have it here. We want to join it together to make it look okay. Yes?
Why, Python wouldn't accept any of my emojis, so it's not perfect.
Anything out? Okay, I will, do you mind checking that out? Thank you. All right, and so in this case here, what we'll do is we'll print out bag colon and then comma, and then we'll have our space, and then we'll do dot join. And then inside of the join, we're going to just pass in bag. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to print out first, comma, and then first underscore item. And then lastly, we're going to print out last two. And then space dot join. So now what we have is we should now, instead of seeing my debugged print statement here, we should, after I run this, see bag and then a space between all of the items within that bag. And then we should see the first item. And there should be, because of this comma, a space between after the colon and the actual item. And then we should also see here the last item and then comma, and then all two of these instead of the quotes here should just be joined with a space. So now we see here, we do have the bag list with the space in between each item. Then we have first, which does hold that space in between the item and the dog, and that's just because of this comma here. And then lastly, we have the last two, which joins them together as well. Does everyone have this part working for them? So now the next thing we're going to look at, and for the rest of this, we're going to be looking at a lot of if-else-if statements. And so for this next portion, if everyone has everything else working well, we're going to look at the branches. So for this first section here, what we're going to be doing is creating a variable called score. And in this case, I'm just going to say score in the exact same way. So I'm going to have it labeled score equals, and we're going to assign it to the value 72. And then now the next thing it asks us to do is to check if score is greater than 60. Then we're going to set our variable outcome underscore 41 to pass. Otherwise, we're going to set it to fail. So the first thing we want to do is do our if statement. So we're going to say if the score is greater than or equal to 60. And with Python, we have a little bit of format with these if statements. So for the if portion, you have your keyword here for if. You have your condition here, which in this case is score greater than 60. And then you have your colon here at the end. Now, how we know that after we've gone through this if statement that there's still code, a part of this if statement is when it's indented in the if statement here. So now what I'm going to do is create the variable outcome 41, and we're going to assign to it the value pass. Then afterwards, what we're going to do is we're going to have our else statement here. Now this else portion, we're going to have the same variable outcome 41. And what we're going to do is assign a value fail to it. Now what you'll notice here is the else statement doesn't have a condition at all. It's just else. So in Python, we have if else. We also have an elif, which we'll get to later. but it's saying if this condition is not met, we'll just go to the very last option, which is else. So now when I print this out, print out outcome underscore 41. And then here, what should print out since I have 72 should be pass. But then let's say I change it. Down here, but score equals 41. And now it failed. So this is also, again, another form of testing when you're given instructions to do, regardless of what you think the value is, you want to test out all the conditions that you could possibly think of just to make sure that it works. And in this case, these are considered edge conditions that we're checking the lowest portion or the highest portion, which is 72, or the lowest portion in this case, which is going to be 41, which is the fail. But we do have other edge conditions we'll get into throughout the rest of the semester. Just keep one in there. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about this portion? About conditional statements? Or even how it's being assigned to a variable here?
So
So you mean this value? Or
no. Does it have to be done? Just print out?
you could just print out pass, but in this case, because of the instructions saying to set it to that, then you do that. But it could just say print out pass, and that works as well. Anybody else? All right. So I'm going to move on now to the next one. And this one, we're going to be checking to see if the values stored within our variables are equal or not. So I want you guys to at least try your hand at it. And you can compare the two. And then I'll give you half a minute to try your hand at it, and then I will show you how to do it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and guide you guys through this. So the first thing it says to do is if they are equal, set the message to 42. To equal, and we're going to print out that to equal. Otherwise, we're going to set the message to be not equal. And then we're going to only print out message 42 at the end. So first things first is we're going to have an if statement. That if statement is going to say if they are equal. So in this case, A is equivalent to B. So we're going to be checking if A at this point, which is 7, is equivalent to B at this point, which is holding 7. Now we have our conditional statement and we have our if statement written out correctly. Now we want to go ahead and message under 42, assign the value to the message. So in this case, it says if they're equal, we're going to assign equal. So for the else portion, we're just going to assign message 42 to not equal. So right now, as it stands, I have A assigned to 7, B assigned to 7. So the message that we should see when I print it out should be equal. So that we see that it does say equal, and that's because A and B are the same. Now let me comment this out and test out my other value, which is just going to be B, I assigned it to 100, and A, I assigned that to 42. Now, since these two are not equal, it should just print out not equal, and it means that it has checked this condition. It didn't meet that. It moved on to else. It met that, and it printed out not equal. Did anyone have any questions about this if you're trying it on your own? The very last thing we're going to go through, and then I will let you guys go. Make sure that you save your work after this, is we're going to be looking at temperature here. So in this case here, we're going to create a temporary variable called temp underscore F. And I'm just going to assign some variable 68 to it. If I were you, I would go ahead and try to at least assign different values to this so you can test it out. So I got it equal to being 68, which means that it should be mild. That gets print out since that's a less than 75. But I also want to do something for the first condition. So I'll put in there 31. And then I'll do another temp underscore F here to check out less than 60, 55 here, since that's 55 is more than 32 and it's less than 60. Then the very last one, I'm going to check to see if it's just warm. So we'll do temp underscore F and assign it to be 80 or 76, anything above 75. So now we have our tested values here. We now want to go ahead and start with our if statement. So the very first one that we're going to do is if some value is less than 32. And in this case, we're just checking the temp underscore F value. So if that is less than 32, then inside of here, we want to print out that it's freezing. But in this case, sorry, not print out. We're going to actually save it to a variable called comfort. So we're going to put it in comfort. And we're going to assign to it freezing. Then there's another portion of this because we have multiple conditions here. We're not going to just focus in on if else. There's a third or second part of this that's actually elif, which is essentially else if. So if, else if, else type of thing. But in Python, it's elif. So in this case, we're going to just type in elif. And we want to have a condition here. So if temp underscore F is less than 34, then that condition will be met and we will assign freezing. Elif, if temp underscore F is less than 60, the next one, we're going to assign comfort cold. And then we're going to do another elif statement. Elif temp underscore F is less than 75. We're going to do comfort is equivalent to mild. Then the very last thing we're going to do, because we've checked for all of these other conditions, we've checked for if it's less than 30, less than 60, less than 75. Now we only care about the very last thing, which is warm. So we don't necessarily have to write a condition for that. We just have else. And then in this case, we're going to do comfort equals warm. So now when I print out comfort with 68, it should print out mild. With 31, it should print out freezing. With 55, it should print out cold. And then with 76, it should print out, yeah, warm in this case, because that's the very last condition. Is everyone good up to this point? Any questions? Okay, so you can go ahead and save your work.